So the way I want to start talking about this concept about the philosophy of time is from my personal experience of it. Um, I was in a physics class a few years ago, and so we're solving that futile question about if you throw a ball upward in the air from 25 meters, at what time it'll be 11 meters from the ground. And so it's a quadratic equation. In the end, you get two solutions. One of them is a negative solution, one of them is positive. So I was told to discard the negative solution because time cannot be negative. And so the positive solution was the real answer. Now that makes sense to me on an intuitive level, why when you say that time cannot be negative. But inside of the physics class, the velocity can be negative, the position can be negative. What makes time so different that time cannot be negative? And so that is where I was introduced to this dichotomy of time being from a scientific point of view. There is no reason for it to um, not move in the negative direction, but from the personal experience, it's pretty obvious that it cannot. So could you talk a little bit about why is that, and what people think about that difference?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, with the philosophy of time, there's definitely some overlap between kind of the science of time and the physics of time and what we do in the philosophy of time. So, I mean, maybe some of the things that you were pointing out there might just be connected to the idea that, say, time can't go backwards, or that it can't run that way. And then there is this really interesting connection between our experience of time and the way that our kind of best science describes time. And that's a really big topic in the philosophy of time. So kind of the questions that you were introduced to when it comes to time, those are definitely ones that philosophers are interested in different aspects, but kind of maybe connecting, say, how does our experience of time, or kind of what does our best ontology of time, how does that connect to our best scientific theories, right? So, I mean, we'll get this vision of the world, and we'll have this kind of we will have space and time, and there'll be a relation between those things. And then kind of how does that look? How is the world actually? And so what are kind of the rules on time that you were kind of pointing to, and how do those connect to the way that we experience time? And there are a bunch of potential quite drastic discrepancies between the way that science tells us time is and then the way that we experience time. So yeah, I think that's a great question and a nice way to be introduced to the topic of time.
Yeah. So that's what talking a little bit more about that. So the concept of the arrow of time or the direction of time.
Yeah.
How do you interpret that? How do you personally interpret that?
Yeah, okay, that's a really nice question as well. So there are different ways to interpret it within the literature. So there are the questions, I mean, how do we explain this direction of time that some things are earlier than others, and that it always seems like time has this direction, whereas if we're looking at space, space doesn't have that same kind of direction. So that's one way where we can kind of really distinguish space from time, because when we go out in space, right, we can walk in any direction. It's not as if we're kind of stuck going in, all to the left all the time or something like that. But with time, it does seem that we're born and then we live and then we die, and that's kind of the route that we're on, and we can't go back, and we can't live our lives in another direction, and we can't change things. So not only us, but also kind of processes in the world, they have this directedness in time, it seems. So, I mean, you could explain that. People have tried to explain it in different ways. You might say that the direction of time, it just comes down to, say, our psychology, right? And I mean, there's this direction of time, and that's because what? I mean, why? Well, we remember the past, but we don't remember the future, and that's just kind of the beings that we are. So there is this difference between the past and the future. You could explain it in terms of the arrow of entropy, right? I mean, you could just say, go to thermodynamics and say, well, I mean, why is there this arrow of time? Because entropy increases. Or you could explain it maybe as saying it's something in the structure of just the space-time manifold. So you could say that there is just maybe something about the structure of space and time that's built into it that says that there will always be this direction of time. So, I mean, there are different ways. You could also explain it as in the arrow of causation, right? You could say, I mean, what explains that there's there's a direction of time? Well, I mean, it's because there's cause effect. Causes always come before their effects, right? And that's kind of what grounds the arrow of time. And that's why we think that there's a directedness and we can't go backwards. I mean, because we have a cause and then we have an effect, and that's just kind of how the arrow of time goes. Personally, which one do I think is the most plausible? That's something that I'm still kind of working on and that I'm interested in. I think perhaps maybe that the psychological explanation is maybe, I would maybe need a little bit more motivation to accept that one. So maybe that one's the one that's perhaps the least convincing to me. The arrow of causation, I think, is interesting, and it has some good potential arguments that can be made for it. Thermodynamics, also maybe a good one. So I mean, I do think that there are some good theories that are out there to explain the direction of time.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And as you said, it is not a simple question to have a straightforward answer to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I was reading your paper, the 2020 dissertation paper that you wrote, and you talked about fragmentalism in that.
Okay. Yeah.
Could you maybe explain a little bit about what fragmentalism talks about?
Yeah, of course. So fragmentalism, it's a view that was introduced relatively recently by Fine, and it is a view that is saying, if we're going to be atheorists, and what are atheorists? So there's a lot of kind of background here. So in the philosophy of time, there's this distinction between the A theory and the B theory. And atheorists, they think that kind of tense, so past, present, and future, that's kind of a real aspect of the world. So we can divide the world into past, present, and future. And they usually think that there's something special about the present, and that the present somehow moves and so forth. B theorists, on the other hand, they don't think that there is a fundamental distinction between past, present, and future. It's just the earlier than relation. So it's not as if we have a world and we can divide it into, hey, this is past, this is present, this is future. But instead, all that we can do is order events by the relation of earlier than. And they usually don't think that time genuinely passes. So what fragmentalism is it is a view, it's kind of by Fine, it's introduced as an atheoretic view that is supposed to be the best type of atheoretic view. So if you're going to be an atheist, he says we should all decide to be fragmentalists, right? And so there are these other A theories that are on the table. You could be a presentist. And the presentist just holds that the present exists, the past and the future don't exist, and the present somehow renews or changes itself, and that's kind of how time passes. So that's one atheoretic view. You could be a presentist. If you're going to be an atheist, you also have the option to be a moving spotlight theorist. And what they think is that all of time, all the moments of time exist, right? So they endorse kind of the continuum of time. And how does time kind of pass? How does it move? Well, the present is special. It's kind of like this spotlight on the continuum of time. And what it does is it moves along the continuum, and time passes as it moves. You could also be a growing block theorist. And the growing block theorist thinks that the present and the past exist. And how does time pass? Well, it passes as the present edge of the block kind of expands, right? And that's how the present kind of moves, and that's how time passes. So as more time passes, more time gets added to the block. So the three kind of traditional views of the A theory are going to be presentism, the moving spotlight theory, and the growing block theory. So fragmentalism comes along, and it says this is kind of a novel way to think of the A theory. And Fine thinks that this is, if you're going to be an atheist, you ought to be a fragmentalist. And fragmentalism says that the world can be divided into these kind of fragments of tensed facts that are all going to be internally consistent, but that they are going to be at odds with one another. So if we think about the world, we just have all of these kind of fragments, and that's why it's called fragmentalism, of kind of tensed facts. And so we'll have from one moment, we'll have kind of the tense facts that we are now having this meeting, and I mean there'll be all the tense facts, right, that there are at that moment. But those tense facts will stand in contradiction to tense facts at other moments, because it might be, you know, at this moment we're having this meeting and we're both sitting, and then there'll be a moment tonight where we're not having this meeting and we're both standing or eating or doing whatever. But each of the tense facts, they're internally consistent, they're at odds with one another, but they're all equally real, like that they all exist at the same time. So fragmentalism, it gets at this idea that we have this distinction between tense, and there would be then kind of another job that the fragmentalist would have to do, and they would have to say how fragmentalism accounts for the passage of time. And that's kind of another task that they would have to do. But fragmentalism, it gets at this idea that we have all of these tense facts, and they are all kind of part of their own fragments, which are their own kind of realities in themselves. And even though they're contradictory, it's not as if they're all kind of part of this underlying part of the world. So there's no actual contradiction in the world. So yeah, fragmentalism is just a novel view of the A theory that tries to kind of get around some of the other issues with, traditional A theoretic views.
Right. So you talked about the specialty about the present, and so how the atheists claim that there is something special about the present, and past and future are something two very different things than the present. When we talk about the present, when we talk about the now, as you might be able to tell, I have a little bit of interest in science and physics and stuff like that. And so the thing that comes to my mind is the relativity of simultaneity. So basically, if I can try and explain what that is, of course, you know that, but for anyone who's watching, so the relativity of simultaneity, I was watching this video by Brian Greene, and so it talks about a very good example to explain this. So let's say if there are two presidents of two countries who want to sign a treaty at the exact same time, how do they decide to do that? They decide that both the presidents will sit opposite to each other, and there'll be a source of light in the middle, and they'll sign the agreement at the exact moment that light hits them. And so then they put this entire situation inside a moving train. And so if you were to look at it from inside the moving train, as soon as the light hits both of them, and they're sitting at an obviously equal distance from the source of light, and so as soon as the light hits them, they sign the paper, and they have signed it simultaneously. But from the perspective of someone who is outside of the train and who is looking at the whole scenario playing out, since the train is moving, one person is moving towards the source of light while the other is moving away from the source of light. And since the speed of light is constant, for an observer outside the train, the light will reach this person before it reaches the other person. And hence, what was simultaneous from the perspective of inside the train is not simultaneous from people outside the train. And so this kind of breaks the idea of there being a constant now in the universe, right? So what do the atheists have to say in defense against this argument about?
Yeah, perfect. That is a very good point to bring up. So that idea, so special relativity and this idea of the relativity of simultaneity, it's one of the reasons why B theorists think that, or a lot of B theorists think that the B theory is better, right? That it's a better representation of kind of what time actually is, because the B theory says, well, there is no now that holds universe wide, right? That just doesn't make sense. All that we have are these kind of moments of time, and that's kind of we just have these ordering of moments, and they're all equally real, right? So when we think of time, we just think of it as this four-dimensional space-time block. So we can just think of a block, and what do we have in there? Well, we have all of space and we have all the moments of time. And it just, what time is real? Well, they're all real, but you're just going to be at a different one. So Socrates exists, he's hanging out doing whatever Socrates is doing, and he's just as real as we are at this moment, but we just happen to not be at his moment. But it's not as if we can say we're special because we're in the now, or something like that, right? So the B theory, yes, is thought to accord well with kind of what relativity tells us. A theorists, they have tried to kind of respond, and there are some pretty complex arguments where they try to say, okay, well, we can make our view at least compatible with what relativity tells us. But I am of the, I guess, general disposition that I think that suggestions such as the one that you put forward about the relativity of simultaneity, that they do provide good reason to be a B theorist. So I do think that idea that, I mean, from any moment in time, they're all going to be kind of equally real. So if we have kind of observers at different moments of time, then they're going to judge different things to be simultaneous, but each of their perspectives is going to be just as real, right? So in that way, we can't say, well, there's one perspective that is the special perspective of the now. And that, you know, kind of we all are in that somehow. So I do think, yes, that consideration does provide support for the B theory.
Makes sense, yeah. And so we talked about how the B theorists claim that the entire past, present, future, all of it exists as at once. So then I've heard arguments from this side saying, if that is true, how to explain the passage of time? One possible answer to that is that the passage of time is simply a property of the human brain. And so then but that is a little difficult for me to understand. Could you explain a little bit about how that would work?
Yeah, fantastic. So I think that is one of the most interesting questions when it comes to the philosophy of time. And I know Einstein also thought that it was really interesting about kind of how our experience fits into his theories, right? Because they seem to be at odds. So yes, if you are a B theorist, then you have this four-dimensional space-time block, right? And all moments are equally real. So they exist at kind of, they're all equally real, but it's not as if they exist at like one moment, right? Because they're just kind of all there, just as with space. So there's no now on that picture that we can kind of pick out. And when we think of the passage of time, how do we usually think of the passage of time? Well, we think of the present or the now as changing, or it's renewing itself, right? So we're in a present moment right now, but it's going to be a different present moment that we're going to be in 2 hours from now, right? So it seems like there's this very tight connection between being able to pick out kind of the present and also saying that time passes, because the present renews itself, it changes, it moves. That's how we kind of get at the passage of time. Now, insofar as in the B theory, in this block universe, there is no special now that we can pick out. So that automatically seems to make an issue for kind of, well, then what's moving, right? So where is this kind of special moment that's changing or renewing itself? And we can be like, oh, that's where time's passing. So yeah, that makes a big issue on the block universe to kind of figure out where exactly is the passage of time in the world at the ontological level. Where can we point out the passage of time? If we just have this kind of array, this timeline of moments, and all of those moments equally exist, and they're all kind of there, right? You can think of it, I mean, along the lines of, say, a painting, right? So, I mean, we have the painting and it has all of the different colors that go with the painting. What's moving on the painting, right? We can't pick out one special part of the painting and say, well, here's kind of the part of the painting that's moving and changing, and that's where we can say that the painting is passing, like parts of it are passing. So yes, there is this kind of issue with trying to figure out the passage of time, because it's very, very unintuitive to say that time doesn't genuinely pass, right? From our experience, everything that our experience tells us, time passes. right? It seems absurd to say that time doesn't genuinely pass, because I mean, we grow, we age, our hair changes, things decay, right? Like the generations pass. And so it seems very odd to say, no, I mean, we're just living in this kind of static universe where things just are, right? So yes, there is this very large tension between what our experience tells us about time and the passage of time, and what seems to be represented in this block universe. So what do B theorists do? Well, the vast majority of them just say, no, I mean, the block universe theory is right. Time does not genuinely pass. How do we explain the passage of time? Well, it's a matter of our psychology. We're just beings such that we experience the world like time really passes. Maybe we kind of experience these different static moments, like on a film strip, and then somehow our psychology, the workings of it, it puts them together in a way that it seems like time, like there's passage of time. So, but really, it's only going to be these static moments that we experience kind of, well, here's moment one, here's moment two, here's moment three. But we somehow just put the passage of time into the world. So the passage of time would just be an illusion that is purely a matter of kind of our psychological workings. And how exactly you work that out, well, that's still kind of an ongoing task in the philosophy of time. And that's where you maybe want to appeal to some psychologists and say, can you give us some insight about the way that we experience different illusions? Right? And if there's kind of, we experience other illusions in the world, well, then maybe if the passage of time is an illusion, we experience it in a similar way, right? So kind of really get into the brain and kind of work out how we experience illusions, and kind of maybe see, okay, well, can we explain how the brain sees, I guess, yeah, gets time, right? And how that it kind of works it together. So yes, a lot of B theorists, they think time doesn't really pass. We just have to kind of commit to the B theory, but we can still explain the passage of time. We just have to go to our psychology. There are a few B theorists, so there are exceptions to this, and I guess Tim Maudlin is one example of B theorists who think that time does genuinely pass. So there have been attempts, not by a lot of B theorists, to explain, I guess, the passage of time even in the B theory. But whatever you get with your explanation, if you're a B theorist and you try to say that time really passes, it's going to be a little bit different. Then it's definitely going to be different than what the A theory says. So there's not going to be any big special moment that's changing or renewing itself, because there's just not room for that in the B theory. So you're likely going to get some sort of really sparse account of what the passage of time is, and it's still going to be different than what I think a lot of our intuitions tell us about the passage of time. So I think that that's a very big topic that philosophers are still working on at the moment, and they can definitely learn things from scientists and psychologists when it comes to that.
Right. And so, is there any development in the psychological world or the neuroscience world about this concept that talks that gives us any idea if there is some basis for this?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, so I do know that I guess psychologists, when you look at different temporal illusions, just the way that we can kind of experience time and maybe play with time a little bit, right? How we can kind of disassociate ourselves from time, or kind of you might hear a tone for a certain length, but really it's only playing for a different length, right? So that is, I guess, some of the ways that you can make this connection, and try to kind of go from there. I don't think there has not been any kind of one analysis that has come out and that it has explained it all. So I very much think that it's just a matter of kind of taking what we know about other temporal illusions and then just kind of writing papers on that and kind of putting them together. So that's a really good question. And it's one that I think it would be good to have a psychologist to kind of really kind of dig in on there. But yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So staying on this a little bit. So when we say that the passage of time seems absolutely real because of the human experience, would that be so? So basically, my question is the human experience a reliable source of information? Because if we were to look at things out there in the universe, other than humans, So basically, this point of view of passage of time is a very human centric for us, at least as far as we know, right? And so would that be a reliable way to think about the the truths about the time?
Yeah, good. I think that that is a very nice question, and I think it gets at a deep philosophical conundrum, maybe, right? Is kind of when we're trying to explain the world, what source do we go to? Do we go to our experience? Do we go to our phenomenology? Is that kind of where we get our best knowledge about the world? Or is there kind of this mind-independent world in itself? And do we need to kind of go to that and then try to say, okay, well, that's reality, and then whatever happens after that, we still have to go to that basis. So if we kind of have our experience and it's different than what this kind of mind independent reality is, then our experience is wrong or flawed in some way. So I think that that's, yes, a very, very important question, and one that philosophers have debated about for a long time, is just kind of what is the best source of our knowledge? Is it going to be our experience, or is it going to be that there is this kind of world apart from our experience? So I think before you kind of really answer these big questions about time, that's definitely a question that you need to answer for yourself, right? Do you think that there is this mind independent reality, or do you think that reality is somehow just all in our minds or influenced by our minds? And if it is just kind of in our minds, then you're definitely probably going to say, well, no, I mean, time does pass in a certain sense, because that's all that we have. All that we have is our experience. And so that's all that we can say that we really know, right? If you do think that there is this kind of mind independent reality, then you'll probably say, well, I mean, our experience is just wrong, right? So, I mean, yes, it's something that we feel, and it's something that to us may seem like it's very real, but there are other things in the world that we think seem, when we look at them, or if there are things that are far away, they may look different than what they actually are. Or I mean, so there are different ways that we perceive the world, and we know that they are mistaken, and the world is different, right? So someone might argue that. And if you take that view, then yes, our experience that we have of some things when it comes to time is just going to be misguided. And it's just because we're flawed humans who don't kind of get reality exactly as it is.
Yeah, and so another reason I would be inclined not to rely on the on our own experience would be, for example, the way we perceive color. The reason we perceive color the way we do is because I'm not very sure on if I'm correct on the details about it, but because the structure of the human eye is such that it perceives red, green, and blue in different ways, which is why we perceive color the way we do. If there was to be an alien species with a different structure, uh, assuming they would have the sight aspect in them as well, the way they would experience color would be completely different. And I think that to me is at least a good enough reason not to trust the human experience as much as objective scientific exploration.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, really, really good. So, yeah, I don't know. You probably know of the dress experiment, right? So, oh, okay, that is, it's just this experiment where there's a dress, and you put it out in, I don't know, in the light, or wherever you have it, and people will see the dress as being different colors. So some people will see it as being kind of two colors, and other people will see it as being two other colors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just something where you can take anyone and you can say, what color is this dress? And they'll say, well, I mean, it's red and green, or something like that, right? And then you'll take somebody else and they'll say, well, no, it's not those colors. And so you can very easily do that and show how we kind of perceive color in a different way. And yeah, different species will kind of see the world differently, and so forth. So I think that that's a very nice example of one saying kind of, maybe we seem to perceive the world differently. So where is the reality? Where is kind of the one reality? And if there is just that one reality, then I mean, clearly we're mistaken. Like some of us are seeing it differently. So yeah, that's good. That's
Yeah.
a nice way to connect to time. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I would like to talk about how we measure time. So if you were to think about how we measure time, eventually through clocks, through the let's say the rotation, the revolution of the Earth around the sun and stuff like that. basically, if at the basis of it, what we are measuring is change. And so, what do you have to say about measurement of time being equal to measurement of change?
Okay, good. Yeah. So there is this question. Yeah, I mean, how can we say that time passes or that anything happens unless there is some sort of change, right? Because I mean, if we just live in a temporal vacuum where kind of everything is just frozen, right, and nothing is kind of changing, then how do we say that we're kind of measuring time? Or I mean, what are we doing? I mean, we're not really doing anything there, right? So yes, I think that is exactly right, and that there seems to be this really important connection between change and measuring the passage of time, or measuring just time itself, to say, well, how long was this one moment, right? And I mean, if you're going to know how long it was, then you're going to have to be able to count the different seconds, and there's going to be change there from 1 second to another second, and you're going to be at one moment at one time and then another moment at another time. And so yes, change is very, very important to kind of figuring out measuring time and the passage of time.
Right. Yeah. So, if I were to entertain, so for my, so I might cut this out later, but this is a small thought that I had about if I were to consider if there is a universal clock running in the background, for example, and so there is a physical presence of a passing time. Um, our experience of time is also would also then be based on that clock, right? And so if that clock were to stop, let's say between, I say, A and B, between those 2 points, if that clock were to stop, for example, for 5 years, there is no way I would be able to know that time had stopped. Or if it slowed down or if it sped up, our perception of time would not change.
Fantastic. Yeah, so that's a very nice point. If the whole entire universe were just to suddenly be thrown into kind of this frozen state, right? And then it were to, however long afterwards, it were to kind of just suddenly start up again. Yes, you're exactly right. We would have no idea. To us, it would seem as if it was just, another day had just passed, but really it would have been a whole lot longer if we could kind of get outside the world and there was another clock that we could kind of measure it by, right? So yeah, that's a really nice thought experiment, and it's interesting to think, well, I mean, how can we prove that that's not the case? And it seems very hard to prove that's not the case. So yeah, good.
I really like the idea of the block universe. So here's how I understand the block universe, and you can correct me if I'm getting it wrong. So for the ease of understanding, we reduce the 3D space to two-dimensional, and we assign time as being the third axis. And so then what a block would be the if it's a video, the frames, each and every frame placed one after the other, would be the entire block. Now, if you were to follow if you were to take out a frame, you'd see the entire space. On the other hand, if you were to stay on the line of time, basically each and every point on that uh, three-dimensional model, each and every point would be a different space-time point, right? And so the big question that comes to me with this model is, how do you define yourself? Is the self moving through the space-time? I've heard explanations that says that you are that line, that collection of points in the space-time. How do we make sense of the idea of self in a block universe?
Good, really, really good. So I guess, are you getting at the idea of, how do we define our personal identity in the block universe, and kind of what are we? Are we just kind of, are we all kind of the temporal moments and that is us, or do we kind of exist at one moment and we're all there? It's okay. So that really nicely gets at this distinction in the literature between endurantism and perdurantism. And endurantists are going to say that we exist at every moment wholly, right? So, I mean, all of us at this very, very moment is us, right? If you want to know who am I, who are you, you're here, you exist here. And then there's perdurantism, which says that, well, I mean, what we are is it's only a temporal slice of us that exists right now. And then there's another temporal slice of us that exists when we were 5 years old, and there's another temporal slice that will exist when we're 80 years old. And who are we? Like, what is ourself? Well, it is that whole entire kind of, I don't know, existence of all these different temporal slices of us is what we are, kind of thing. So yes, in this question of kind of personal identity and how do beings and things in general, how do they persist through time? That's also another really important question when it comes to the philosophy of time, because once you get your kind of your ontology of time, you get kind of how time exists, and you kind of get some answers about, so what is the fundamental structure of the world? Well, then you want to know, okay, how do things exist within that structure? And one of the big questions is, how do we persist through time? Because it seems clearly that, I mean, there's some connection between the me now and the me of 5 years ago and the me of 5 years from now. And we want to know, what's that connection? How exactly do those different or just those parts of me, how do they exist? Is it that they're genuinely different temporal parts and different slices? Or is it that I am kind of wholly at each moment and I'm somehow just moving through time, right? So yeah, good.
Uh-huh. And so the block universe would be a B theorist account, right?
Yes, so that's also a very nice question. They are usually paired together. So if you're a block universe theorist, you'll be a B theorist. If you're a B theorist, you'll be a block universe theorist. They're not the exact same thing. Strictly speaking, the block universe is just about, it's an ontological account of time. So it says kind of how does time exist? Well, we have this block, right? So we can just think of a block of wood or a block, a piece of bread or something, and that's just kind of how time exists and space exists. So it's just about kind of the ontology of time. And then the B theory, it's about, it has more to say about the semantics of time as well. So it usually endorses kind of the eternalist continuum of the block universe. So all of time kind of exists eternally. And then it also says, well, there's no fundamental distinction between the past, present, and future. All that we have are the earlier than and later than orderings. But they very much go together. And if you're a B theorist, you're usually you're going to be a block universe theorist, and so yeah, you can pretty much think of them as the same thing, and I don't think you'll go too wrong.
Right. And so then on the other end of the spectrum, would I be right in saying that on the other end of the spectrum, A theorists are usually associated with the moving spotlight theory? So I mean, the other way around, sorry. The moving spotlight theory is usually associated with A theorists.
Good, yes.
Yeah, so I was trying to research about this a little bit, and for the block universe, there is a whole lot of videos out there, many visual representations. I was unable to find something like that for the moving spotlight theory. Could you explain a little bit about what it is and how we could understand the moving spotlight theory better?
Yes, definitely. So with the moving spotlight theory, one way that you can think of it is that take kind of a row of houses, right? So think of a street front, and you have this kind of row of houses, and all of the houses exist, right? So all along the street, you're going to have all of the different houses, and you can think of those as being the different moments of time. And so you'll have kind of house one will be moment one, house two will be moment two, and so forth. So that gets at the eternalist continuum, because the moving spotlight theory, it takes over the kind of the eternalist continuum. So just as the block universe thinks that all of time kind of equally exists, the moving spotlight theory is going to endorse that. And then we can add to that. We can say, okay, say a police car is going by and they have a spotlight, they have a flashlight, and they are shining it out on one of the houses. And so we'll say, okay, well, that is going to be the special house that is lit up by the spotlight. And so say they start at the first spotlight and they say, oh, well, I wonder who's in that house. And so they shine the flashlight. So that is kind of the now and the special moment. And then as the police car moves along, the spotlight's going to move along as well. And for each kind of house that it lands on, well, now that's kind of the present, and that's kind of the special moment that is present. And that's how kind of the present is passing and changing. It's just going to be that there's this kind of spotlight that's illuminating different moments of time. And as it does that, it is bringing kind of the present moment into, I guess, the spotlight. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I need a whole lot of time to think more about that and try to come up with questions about that.
Okay. No. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I usually try to do, so when we are talking philosophy with anyone, usually everyone is like very careful presenting all different aspects and staying away from biases. Especially people who are maybe teaching philosophy, they try to talk about all different aspects from a neutral perspective. I would like to I always try to get people out of that towards the end of it, because it's just fun. What do you personally think is the right answer?
Is it the right answer to some of the questions that we've been talking about? Yeah, good. So, I mean, I'll start out by saying probably what everyone else does, is that I do think that there are some merits to a lot of the different views. So, I mean, no matter what view you endorse, I do think that you can find some strong arguments for it. So I don't think that it's always just going to be kind of a clear answer and, you know, this is the right view. And now, well, if you like this view, then you're just wrong, right? So I very much do think, like much of philosophy, there's a lot of debate and there are a lot of really strong arguments from both sides. Personally, I mean, I still have a lot to think about and a lot to kind of work through, but I do lean towards something along the lines of a B theory block universe view, and getting at this idea. I do like the idea that time does still pass in that universe. So that's kind of a different view in the literature. Exactly how you work that out, that's something that I've been thinking about, and I'm still kind of coming up with my own kind of I don't know, analysis of that. But I do like the idea of a B theory that's kind of somehow combined with the idea that time does genuinely pass, like that. But again, I do think that maybe there are other views that would be are worthwhile. Yeah.
Right. And so since you are very much into this field, what upcoming things, maybe in the scientific world, maybe in the philosophical world, what are the things that you're looking forward to that might that you know are in the working and might bring about a revolutionary sort of an idea, or maybe just a new way to think about the aspect?
Yeah, good. So I do think that getting some more work from psychology and kind of figuring out more about our experience of time and exactly how we perceive time, I think that is very important, and that there'll be some kind of interesting results from that in the future. I also think it's not a field that I know an incredible amount about. My advisor worked in it actually, but I think that it would be interesting to see more about time in areas such as quantum mechanics, right? And see kind of what that tells us about time and what we can learn about time and how that contrasts from some of our other scientific theories. And so if we're kind of mainly just working from special relativity, yes, we get certain answers, but what happens when we kind of change and we go to a different level of the world, and kind of what's going on with time there, right? And then say in black holes, what's going on with time there? And so what are kind of some of the different scientific theories that maybe we still need to figure out a whole lot more about? What are they going to tell us about time? And even when it comes to questions such as time travel. So, I mean, what's going to happen in the future with the more that we learn about science, and what is that going to tell us or help us do when it comes to time travel?
Yeah, you mentioned quantum physics, and so even I have not done much research about it, but in passing, I heard stuff like some fundamental equations. I'm 90% sure I'm talking about the right thing. Some fundamental equations of quantum physics do not include time at all.
I mean, so when it comes to quantum mechanics, I'm probably not going to say a whole lot with a lot of assertion, because it's not my area and my expertise. But yes, I have heard of that, and I do know that there are kind of lots of weird things that kind of happen at that level with time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This was
You're
really
welcome.
insightful. Thank you so much.